specifically some work we're doing at the moment to increase diversity in the Order of Australia. You'll find this very obvious as I go on. I don't know how to use PowerPoint, and there's a fair chance I forget to change the slides until my phone beeps and I'm at the end of my presentation. But I just basically want to cover off today very little about me. I've told you my name, that's all we need. An overview of the Order of Australia, what it is, how it works and why it's important. And then, as I said, this work that we're doing at the moment around increasing the diversity in the Order of Australia and ensuring that it reflects the Australian community in its outcomes and its administration. So perhaps I could ask, just to begin, who knows of the Order of Australia? Oh, that's good. My work's pretty much done. As long as you're representative of the broader Australian public. Anyone know anyone who's received an award or appointment in the Order of Australia? Anyone familiar with any recent public commentary about the Order of Australia? General wave of the hand if you think it's positive or negative. What's thumbs down? I would have liked it if I was gladiator up here at the moment. So that sort of brings us to where this body of work began. I'm sorry, as I said, don't know what I'm doing with my slides. I'll start briefly, as I said, by talking about the Order of Australia, noting that you guys know it, or know of it. So the Governor-General is the Chancellor of the Order of Australia, and up on the screen there, you'll see a quote that he asked me to share with you here. So that's what the Order of Australia means to him as our Governor-General. It provides the people of Australia the opportunity to recognise and say thank you to those whose efforts make our communities and our nation a better place. Recipients don't put their hand up to be recognised. Most would consider their achievements that they have been recognised for to be ordinary. Therein is the great strength of our system. Recipients have been nominated by their peers, considered by an independent process and recognised by the nation. The sum of these contributions speaks to our nation's greatest strength, its people. I guess I wanted to put my lens on that, not to talk across the Governor-General or interpret his words for you. As was said, David said in the introduction, I've worked for the Governor-General for a couple of years now. And the Order of Australia is one of the few things that turns me from being a cynical, jaded sort of person into somebody who genuinely believes in who we are, who believes in the Australian ideals, our values, and gives me optimism for the future. So twice a year at Government House in Canberra and government houses around the country, we'll have investiture ceremonies, which is where people who have been recognised come in. They're incredibly nervous to begin with. They don't know what to expect. And I sometimes describe it to people as a bit like a wedding. That if you think of a wedding at the front, the groom or somebody standing there, and they're nervous, shy, not really sure what to do, and then at some point, as the person they've been married to walks in and is coming down the aisle, they can't help but smile, and they break out, and they're just as a wave of joy washes over them. An investiture ceremony is a bit like that. The person who's been recognised is humble, almost without exception. If you ask them about their experience, they'll say, I don't belong, I don't deserve this. There's other people who do more than me. I just do what I do because that's who I am, and they're very humble. They're up the front, they're a bit overawed about being there, they're in their nicest clothes, the Governor-General standing there at attention, looking at them sternly through the door. His stern face is also his happy face, but then as they get in and they stand up and their citations read out, and what they've done to deserve to be recognised is read out to the crowd, and the organisations they've volunteered for, their years of service, what they've given to a local community, to us as a nation, at an international level is recounted. They look out and they see a wave of faces looking at them, and they tend to pick out their family and loved ones in the crowd. And that's the moment when they just break down in a smile, that wave of community I described what is over. Seems like a funny thing to use a couple of minutes of my presentation about, but it's a microcosm of why I think the Order of Australia is really important. There is a lot of very good in our community. I know no one needs to be convinced of that, but sometimes when you look at the media when you look at the news cycle, when you consider what we're going through in the country now, it is heading to remind ourselves of that in every corner of the country, in lots and lots of different ways, there's people, some of whom are probably you, many of you, I assume all of you are these sort of people actually, I'm not, but you guys are. But there are people who are doing good things. And there are people who are doing good things, not to be celebrated, not to be recognised, not to be patted on the back, but because it's who they are, and collectively, as the Government General said, it's who we are. So that's my spiel and telling you why it's all important and why we do what we do. How it actually works though, anyone can be nominated to be recognised. Nominations are always open, there's no point in time. There's no set fields or no set criteria of what constitutes somebody worthy of recognition. Each nomination is received, excuse me, researched, facts are verified, referees are checked, other people are consulted. And then there's an independent council for the Order of Australia that considers all those nominations and makes recommendations to the Governor-General. The whole process, because of the depth of the research, the time it takes sometimes to get in touch with referees, the time it takes for council to consider these things, can take up to 2 years. And then the Governor-General considers the recommendation and announcements are made at Australia Day and on the Queen's birthday. So that's a basic Order of Australia 101. To summarise, it's a really wonderful moment in time where individuals that are brilliant people are recognised. I think it's important for them as individuals, it's important for their families, it's important for the communities, and I think collectively it's important for us as a nation to celebrate those amongst us to do really good things. And for more people to be aware that we actually have the mechanism to do that, and every one of us as Australians has the ability to access that mechanism and make nominations. So that sort of brings me to where we are at today and why I'm here and why I've been working specifically over the last few months and a bit more generally longer than that about the Order of Australia. In some ways, the system works really well. We're getting more and more nominations, so there is a level of awareness. People know about the system and nominate people for it. There's been some changes made in recent years to make the nomination process clearer and easier. It was not so many years ago that it was essentially a hard copy form that had to be mailed in. It's now obviously an online form and it can be saved and it's quite accessible. And we have made a positive trend, but I'll go into why this is still an issue, towards gender balance. So historically, if you look at the award system began in 1975, between 75 and this year, 31.4% of all awards or appointments have gone to women in the community. That's low, obviously. The trend is improving, but improving too slowly. So over the last 2 years, that number's got to 41%. The Queen's birthday list that the Governor-General announced in June was the highest number ever, or highest percentage ever, sorry, upwards of 46%. So some good stuff, lots of good stuff, brilliant system. But, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's been sustained and significant public criticism of the Order of Australia in recent years. Some of that's because of individual appointments, whose sections of the community consider controversial or not worthy. Some of it's, quite rightly, highlighting some significant and systematic flaws perhaps in the system that have remained unchecked over a significant period of time. Some of that criticism is underpinned by another problem we face, which is a low awareness and understanding of the Order of Australia. So the number of you who put your hands up at the beginning, when I joked that I believe you're representative of the normal of everyday Australians, I think if I ask that question in another auditorium, and I have, far fewer hands will go up. We have a blind spot in that we don't actually have research to back us up. The last research done into public perception and awareness of the Order was in the mid-90s, and that found it sitting somewhere around 34-35%. If I had to guess, if it's changed, it's on the margins, but and not much higher than that. And that's basic awareness and understanding of the system, what it exists for, how it works and how people can access it, I think would be quite low and lower again. And then within the results we have this problem. Every Australian recognised through the Order of Australia and I'm not going to talk about individual recipients and some of the controversy, are worthy people. There's good people already in the system, and there is diversity already in the system. If you read any list, you can pick, you can find an example of an Australian from almost any sort of background who has done almost any sort of work, paid or volunteer that you can imagine in that list. But the diversity is not good enough and not where it needs to be. So, positive trend, albeit slow, around gender balance. We don't know, but our best guess and our informed guess is that we have a similar lack of diversity amongst multicultural communities and amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The system, the Governor-General's made clear that he believes, and I think everyone would hold this belief, that Australia's preeminent national award system should recognise Australia as a community and the diversity of the Australian community. How we make that happen is a bit of an open question. So we've set about trying to ensure that the order is and is perceived by the Australian public to be the highest form of recognition of the efforts and achievements of Australians and reflects in administration and outcome the diversity of Australia. We've worked to do this by improving perceptions of the order, by increasing awareness, highlighting the existing diverse recipients, improving transparency and providing greater guidance about how the system works. And we're specifically targeting sections of the community that have been historically underrepresented in the order by encouraging quality nominations. That last point's somewhat instructive. We don't just have a diversity problem in outcome, we have a diversity problem in nomination. So the number of nominations for women, for example, are significantly lower than the number of nominations received for men. There's fewer nominations for people born overseas or who are first generation or second generation migrants than there are for Caucasian white Australians. Again, we don't have exact data on that spot, but that's our best unpicking of what we do have. So it's not just, there's no systematic barrier to achieving greater diversity, it's a pipeline problem. We need quality nominations that reflect the diversity of Australia coming in, and if we can achieve that, the outcome, as in the awards made, will reflect the diversity. So we've taken a three-pronged approach over the last couple of months. As many of you would be familiar and perhaps sympathetic to, we're doing some of this on the smell of an oily rag to an extent. So we're not running a campaign, we don't have a big bucket of cash, we don't have a huge team of people. David, your team sounds very busy, but 33 people sounds fun. Can I borrow them for a week? 2 weeks? You can't be busy all the year, are you? I should say actually we are very lucky, and reflecting on David's presentation, we have a Navy Chief Petty Officer Image Specialist posted to the Governor-General's office. Governor-General's the Commander-in-Chief of the ADF, and he is the most outstanding professional I've ever worked with. See David nodding, I think you know Paul, don't you? So we are lucky to benefit from Defence's expertise and the quality work that you do. I'm amazed it took me that long into my presentation to get distracted, so I'll go back to the slides. Three-pronged approach on the smell of an oily rag. Content development. I'll jump down actually. None of this is revolutionary or innovative. I don't expect to be telling you guys anything. You guys could all do this better than I could. But whilst it's not revolutionary or innovative in a communication sense, it is to the order of Australia. This isn't work that's been done systematically, and in fact has not been done really, other than here or there for quick sugar hits, basically since the order was established in 1975. Communications and engagement around the order is not hardwired into the administration of the order. It's a very equal system in that anyone can nominate anyone, but that great strength of the system is also its great weakness, because if people don't know about the system, know why it's important and know that they can nominate somebody, or that knowledge is unequal across our community, you're going to have unequal results, which is where we are. That's telling me I'm almost over my time. So we have done a lot of content development, written case studies, video case studies of recipients. The woman in the YouTube screenshot there, Sarah Brown AM, is an example of why the Order of Australia is important. She works in Indigenous communities based out of Alice Springs, a thing called the Purple Bus, basically doing kidney health checks in local Indigenous communities. She's one of the most inspirational, outstanding people you could ever meet, and then you listen to her talk about receiving this award and you could just have knocked her down with a feather. And if you get a chance to watch that video, you'll get a sense of why the order is important and the sorts of people that it does recognise. Written case studies, video case studies, they're not all case studies of recipients. We've taken a conscious decision to try and improve, I guess, the transparency and put a bit of a face to the order. So not dissimilar to some of what David was saying. Anna Nichols, who's there on the Facebook screenshot, is a case officer. And so we've started doing short 3-minute videos of their own people talking about both why they like working on the Order of Australia, what they get out of it, but also explain what it is that they do, what Anna does there as a research officer and how she researches individual nominations, for example. We've started working and trying to build up our stakeholder engagement. Some of that's existing. There is, for example, an Order of Australia Association made up of people who have received recognition through the Order. They have 8,000 odd members. We've always had a little bit to do with them, and I guess the change there is we've been more strategic in what we do with them now. And some of this is really low-hanging fruit. They send a magazine out to their 8,000 recipients 4 times a year. And I said, the Governor-General will love to make a contribution to that every quarter. And they said, no, we wouldn't. And I said, yes, you would. And now we do that. And so we're just picking out some of that low-hanging fruit, building on those relationships. And some really exciting new stakeholder relationships. So with Home Affairs, for example, and their reach into multicultural communities, where Governor-General and Mrs Hurley have attended several events around the country with multicultural leaders that Home Affairs have assisted us with bringing them together so that we can talk directly to them. The Governor-General can make the case to them, task them almost to go back into their communities, find people to nominate, find people to celebrate and participate in the system. So really positive stuff, leveraging stakeholders and working with them as best we can. And perhaps unusually for the Governor-General, whose job is not to be in the media talking too much about the day-to-day affairs of the state, we've been more proactive in our approach to media. Some of that is quite local. It's me hitting the phones and pitching stories to local papers, radio stations about people in their areas and drawing some dots for journalists. But some of it is putting the GG forward and out on a little bit of a ledge and saying that this work is a priority. And so the screenshot there, as that Margaret Court controversy was happening, that was on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald and was the result of a quite deliberate decision to engage with the media and be open about some of the historic trends in the system, but also open about the priority that he is placing and believes that we as Australians should place on reforming the system. As I said, it's not revolutionary or innovative, it's pretty basic comms strategy, comms implementation. But what we're doing and what we've done, I think, pretty successfully over the last few months is prove the concept, make the case that these things should be hardwired into the administration of the Order of Australia, make that case internally and across government, and placing greater value on communications and engagement, and building resources. So building those case studies, building those relationships, building some collateral and content that will serve us well going forward. Next steps, help. Look, I'll basically close there, but just with two final points. Hopefully, and sorry if I sort of made it all sound too sugary and nice at the start, but that's something I genuinely believe in. So each of you has the potential to nominate somebody for the Order of Australia. It doesn't actually take that long. It's something that, to be honest, I never would have considered doing prior to 2 years ago joining the office. It's something that I now hector family, friends, people I meet in the line at the shops about the importance of doing it. It really is worth doing. Each of us would know people in our own lives, in our own communities who do great things. And if you just close your eyes for 15 seconds and think, you'd probably come up with a handful straight off the bat. You extrapolate that out and spend an hour on each, you'd have them in the system nominated for recognition through the Order of Australia, and they could be that person at an investiture ceremony at Government House in a year or two's time, receiving the recognition that they deserve. So I really would, at a personal level, implore you to consider doing that. But professionally, I'd like your help, both any ideas about stuff that we could do better. Like I said, I don't have any or all of the answers. But also, each of you through your work would have connections, ideas of people that you regularly deal with, and you could almost help be evangelical advocates for the Order of Australia for us. So I mentioned briefly we've started forming some really strong relationships across government with Home Affairs. We've had chats with the NIAA, with others. We'd like that to continue. So if there is, when you go back to your work, if you think about your own work, your own opportunities that open up, if I could ask anyone to think a little bit creatively around, is there something there? We're not saying make this the main focus, but is there, a slide we could put in a slide deck, or a brochure we could put in a kit bag, or some digital assets we could share that at the appropriate times you might promote out for us. And I think there is more low-hanging fruit than we've realised already across government, and that's one of the reasons I was so excited to come and speak to you today to I guess, beg your indulgence and ask for your assistance. Now, that's about all I've got. But before I say afternoon tea, does anyone have any questions, comments? I'll take nominations here if you just shout them out from the floor. James?
Yeah, James from the National Indigenous Australians Agency. Back when I was working at PMC, and there was controversy around calls to revoke the Order of Australia, it was an easy response for us. We said it's a matter for the Government House, and sent in your direction. What are you going to do? What's the process? What's the thinking that goes on in Government House when there are other calls for revoking and all that?
Yeah, it's there's a couple of bits to it. One, at a purely practical media management issue, there is a point where we need to separate the Governor-General out from the decision-making process. And it is true that in all matters relating to individual appointments to the Order of Australia, he acts on the advice of the Council for the Order of Australia. So it's a bit of a cop-out on that level that we push it down to this Council. What we've done, and I'll be pretty blunt within these four walls and on this live video and to the whole world that might be watching. The Council itself, I think, has come a long way over the last couple of years. So in September from last year, they put out a statement specifically around the very public call-ins for Bettina Arndt and Mike Carlton to have their appointments terminated. Not everyone agreed with what that statement said or how the Council had chosen to interpret the Constitution of the Order of Australia, but just the fact that they got out there and said and put some meat behind their decision making and were a little bit transparent is a step change. So we don't jump at every call for an award to be terminated or cancelled, but we are trying to increase understanding of when and where that might occur and why it might not occur in other circumstances. There's an interesting side note to it that if you give awards out to 1,000 odd people twice a year, you're not going to get 100% approval rating on 1,000 Australians. And the Governor-General has sometimes said, like, we're not appointing saints here. Everyone comes with complexity, with issues, some of the more public criticism. Sorry, I'll probably stop there. But we're not appointing saints. Everyone's individual, everyone's got good, everyone's got some areas that other people might not agree in. And what we've got the Council to do is be much clearer around when and where they might take action and what the grounds would be to terminate or cancel an award. Another question before we go to afternoon tea? Right at that.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm just wondering if you've done any background research on trends over time from nominations, knowing that we've had a very strong defence force space, Governor-General, and that trend changed when we had a female Governor-General for nominations?
We have done some analysis of nominations, and I think Governor-General Bryce probably did have an impact on nominations for women, for example, but it's hard to pick out the causality of whether that's that we had an outstanding inspirational woman as our Governor General, all the work that she directed, and there was a burst of activity in her term aimed at boosting female nominations. So another side that's not part of this body of work that's going on at the moment is around our systems that underpin the administration of the order, and we're hoping aiming that gives us much greater capacity to interrogate and analyse data. So it's a really important point. Sorry, one more at the back there.
Kate Corbett from Deep. The thing that immediately came to my mind when you talked about Order of Australia was Lee Sales joking about seeing someone wearing the badge somewhere and thinking it was a bit, trying to think of the delicate way to say this, a bit naff, I suppose. It's sort of got a reputation of being high level. Are you sort of working at bringing it down a level or a few levels?
Yeah, it's a good question and a good point you make. So at a practical level, in terms of the last few months, yes, every one of those case studies I spoke about are OAM. The order has 4 levels, starting with the middle of the order going up to the companion, and it brings a level of complexity in and of itself when you talk about the order, because there's no easy way to explain it. But the way I've explained the levels to people, journos and the like, when I've been trying to increase their understanding, is if somebody, to put in current topical terms, if somebody was to invent a vaccine that cured a global pandemic overnight, that's large humankind, international scale change, that's an AC. If somebody was to be responsible for administrating that vaccine and saving or turning a dire health situation in one town around, that's typically like an AM level. If you're the nurse or the doctor who's working 27 hours a day for 5 years straight to get those needles into arms or whatever, that's an OAM. So without going too far off the tangent, the examples we're highlighting are very much the everyday people at a community level to try and make it more relatable. The recipients we're picking out in those case studies, we're quite consciously and tactically doing it, I suppose, to let people see themselves in there. So there's a cross-section of backgrounds, there's a cross-section of endeavour. So we hope as we keep building up that bank, and we're probably really focused on content creation and need to turn our mind, picking up some of the ideas out of David's presentation, to dissemination and getting that reach and engagement more. But we're hoping as we build up that bank of content that we will have enough that we're then able to micro-target and let different people in the community see themselves in it. And I think one of the long-term outcomes of that is that we reduce that NAF level. The other point I'm making, I'm not having a go at Lee Sars at all, is when in my job, COVID aside, one of the great privileges is tagging along with the Governor-General, Mrs Hurley, when they go out to communities. And I turned my mind back to Australia Day, and we were in Wangaratta, and there was an auditorium probably a little bit bigger than this one for the Australia Day citizenship ceremony. And at the beginning of it, the mayor, who was emceeing, asked 14 or 15 people to stand up, and they'd gone out of their way to invite recent people who'd been recognised over the previous few years in the order to their citizenship ceremony, and he asked them all to stand up. And the applause that they got from that town told me that it's not naff at that grassroots level. There was genuine respect there, there was genuine admiration there, and so I think there is a little bit of a disconnect between some of the high level commentary and I'm guessing about all this because we don't have data, what the perception is at the grassroots level, where I think the level of help in still has a lot of meaning and should convey a lot of respect. Michael? Oh no, we've got another question.
Sorry, Michael, everyone's probably pretty hungry, so I'll keep this short. But I know at the start of your presentation you mentioned that a big aim is to increase the diversity that you're seeing in the nominations and the outcomes. A lot of the data that was included kind of broke down the cohort by everyone that's been nominated as well as women. Is there work going into capturing more intersectional data so that you can kind of have a proof for where the gaps are?
Yeah, absolutely. As I briefly mentioned, the systems change in responding to another question. It's a real blind spot that we the nomination form at the moment, or it's just changed, hasn't even carried some of the questions that are now or have been standard in other government forms for 10, 15, 20 years. So we are operating from a bit of a data blind spot. We've addressed that now, and we'll continue to address it by making our systems better, which should, I think, the goal, separate to this body of work, should be in a few years that we can actually tell in more real time where we are going really well in nominations, to think of it positively, but down to the level where we might be not receiving the volume we should expect, and being able to then target our comms efforts by saying we need to go into Tasmania because nominations for women or people from a multicultural background or whatever, it could be an industry sector that's underrepresented, we're not getting the nominations we might reasonably expect. So we think we're making the systems change behind the scenes that will enable that level of data analysis to happen, and then if we can hardwire the comms and engagement into the administration of the system, the two should be able to work hand in hand. So the awareness of where we have an issue, we should then be able to redeploy our communications and engagement approach to maybe address it in something closer to real time than the sort of the 45-year lag that we're dealing with.